Hello and welcome to ECIV 309 Lab 1, where we will be taking a look at the Revit interface, navigation, views, and printing. When you first open up Revit, you should see this welcome screen, and notice that we have a couple of divisions here, projects and families. Families are like blocks in AutoCAD, where you create objects for later insertion into a Revit project. We'll come back to those later. Under projects, notice these templates, which are nice to get some default settings when you're first starting a project. You'll probably mostly use the architectural and construction template, and we'll come back to that a little bit later as well. For now, we're just going to open a sample project to get a little familiar with moving around and the interface. So you might see the basic sample project up here. If you don't, we're going to go ahead and hard open it just so you know where it's located. So let's go ahead and open and scroll to the hard drive and open the program files folder, Autodesk folder, Revit 2014 or perhaps 2013 if you're using that, and then scroll down to the samples folder, and now look for the RAC Basic Sample Project .rvt. RAC just stands for Revit Architectural Basic Sample Project. Make sure you have the RVT extension. Select that and click Open. Now we see the full Revit interface, which we're going to go over. And in this main window here, you see our cover sheet of the Revit Basic Sample Project. So we'll come back to this in a bit. For the moment, let's before we start getting into it, I'd like to save this project because we are going to be changing some things. So let's save it. Go up here to our Revit icon in the upper left hand corner and do a save as project, and for now just save it to the desktop and name it your initials hyphen basic project. Okay, we should see the name change up above here in the title bar, and now if we make any changes, we're not affecting our original template file that we opened up. Okay, let's take a look at the Revit interface. Starting at the top, very top here, we see this little bar, it's just called a quick access toolbar, and common Windows icons of opening and saving. This is a handy little one for measuring and dimensioning, and some text, and this is a default 3D view, and some other things here that we'll come back to. So main thing I just want you to know is the name of this quick access toolbar, because I'll refer to it as we come back to it later. The next thing is what we call the ribbon and you might be familiar with this by now with other software programs that use this structure. For the most part, in this class, these tabs on the ribbon that we'll be using, primarily we'll use the Architectural tab and Annotate, the View tab, Manage, and Modify. So we'll come back to those, but just again, be aware of this area called the ribbon and the various tabs. The next thing is this little window on the left called the Properties window, and this, as the name implies, allows us to change properties of various objects, and we'll be using it quite extensively. It'll make more sense as to what it's for later, but again, just be aware of its name and location. If for some reason it's not showing up, let's see there. Then best thing to do, for instance, let's just close these for now. Let's say they disappear, or you accidentally hit the X button. You want them back. Under the View tab of the ribbon, go clear over to the right to User Interface and click on Properties, and also bring our project browser back. So for most of the time you'll want these two windows open, as we'll be using them quite extensively. The project browser window allows you to access the different views in your window. So let's actually go back over here. This of course is our main window and what we're seeing, and the project browser lets us navigate to different views in the main window. Here you see floor plans, and right now what we're looking at is the cover sheet, and if we scroll down on this, you'll see that it's highlighted in bold under the Sheets category, the title sheet or cover sheet. If we wanted to, for instance, see the first floor plan of level 1, we double click on that and we get the floor plan view. Let's take a little more in-depth look at this project browser window. And I'm just going to collapse all of these and look at the main categories. And let's even collapse this. So notice it's organized into views and legends, scheduled sheets, families, groups. So again, this is where you come to access the information you're trying to work with or look at. So we'll be using Project Browser. It's a very integral part of Revit. Most of the time when we'll be working to actually create our model, we'll be in the views. And notice it's broken up into floor plans, 3D views, elevations, sections, building sections, wall sections, detail views, and renderings. So very organized into the different categories we'll be working with. Okay, and then expanding each of these, of course, as we saw earlier, broken up into further different floor plan views, and the same for the 3D elevations. So we'll come back to Project Browser, but for now, again, just be aware of what it is and where it's located, and make sure that it's on most of the time, as we'll be using it quite extensively. couple of other areas to notice is down here at the bottom left of the screen is the view control bar, where we can set our scale, our detail level, coarse, medium, or fine. Most of this will make more sense as we get into it. What we're looking at as far as graphic display type, wireframe, hidden, shaded, so forth. Turn on sun paths, shadows, crop regions. There's temporary hidden hide isolate button, which is very handy, and reveal hidden elements, and temporary view properties. So view control bar we'll use quite a bit as well, so be aware of it and what's there. And a lot of this stuff, once you use Revit for a while, will just become second nature. Okay, a few other icons down here on the right, which we won't use too often, but other than this filter, be handy to look at which items are selected. So get in the habit of glancing down at this occasionally to see how many items you have, objects you have selected. We have this up in the right hand corner of this main view window is these control for view and zoom. Brings up a little navigation wheel that can be handy. Typically I just use the middle mouse button for zooming and panning. So either way. Here we'll just zoom in and out. For some reason my middle mouse button doesn't always work real well when I hold it down, so if you have that problem for panning, you can also click the shift button, hold the shift button down on your keyboard, and use the right mouse button, hold it down, and that will also allow you to pan as well. Okay, so now let's go back and get a little more practice with some of these things. First, let's go back to the project browser. And from here, find families and expand that in the project browser. And let's look for doors single flush. So doors single flush, and we see this 800 by 200 or 2100, which is this basic sample project is in metric. We'll be using feet and inches primarily when we get into this, but metric is more international, so that's why it's set up this way. So let's double click on this single flush 800 by 2100 door and see what happens. What happened is we are telling the software to take a look at this single flush door, which is a family, which again is similar to AutoCAD block, if those familiar with AutoCAD. Notice a couple things happen. When we double clicked it, we get the type properties dialog window, and also in our properties window up here we get highlighted our single flush door. It shows a little icon of the door. So we can change things about the door and the properties and the type properties, which gives us even further drilling down into the family itself, lets us do additional things. Notice in this type properties, click on this preview button and we can see a little 3D view of the door as well. Here what I'm doing is holding down the shift key and the left mouse button to rotate around. You can look at different views. We have a 3D view, we can look at just a front view, a right view, and so forth. So this helps us to see what's going on with this particular door. Okay, we'll actually be playing more with this type properties later, so we'll get a lot of use with that. So for now, let's just go ahead and cancel out of here, and we're going to take a look at this properties window up here a little bit more. Okay, so let's take a look at something different. Back here in Project Browser, go to the level 2, double click on that under floor plans, and we should see our level 2 floor plan pop up. Okay, I'm back. I paused for a minute to just get my bearings and like to change directions a little bit here. So up to this point, we have hopefully gotten familiar with the Revit interface and gone over each section of what we see here on the screen. At this point, what I'd like to do is do a little practice with looking at a wall property. Before we get into that, I want to point out, and this is sometimes difficult to get your mind wrapped around on how Revit works, but there's just one model, and what we're looking at here are just different snapshots of portions of that model. But if we make a change anywhere, it changes the model, and so that change will show up in every view. Let's just take an example here. So right now we're in level 2 view, and if we go up to our ribbon in the view category, notice over here on the right, switch windows, that we have still our title sheet is open and level floor plan 1, and we can switch back and forth between these windows by selecting that. So this is just a Windows operation, or we can tile them and see them all. Okay, let's close our title 1. Sometimes you want to come and check this out and close some windows so that if you get too many of them open, it can use up system resources. Let's close also level 1, and let's open a 3D view. So in our views, go to this 3D, default 3D view, and click on that. It opens another window. Let's select on our level 2 and then do tile. Zoom in here on level 2 and select a 3D view and zoom in on that. Okay, so what we're looking at here's the one model, and we're just looking at the level 2 view at this point. Notice if I select on this front wall on level 2, it highlights it over in the model as well. What the level 2 floor plan view is showing us is basically it's just turning objects and annotations off and on. So it's kind of a visibility issue, and we can control that as much as we want. A couple different ways to do that is one, this temporary down here in the view control bar down at the bottom, the little glasses icon, temporary hide isolate objects. If we have that front wall selected, and let's say we want to just see walls in this level 2. We don't want all this other information. So we could click on this temporary icon and do a couple things. We can hide or isolate, and we can do it by category or by element. So let's just say we wanted to just have only that front wall show up in this view. So we could isolate element, and there now all we see is just the wall in this view. So we didn't delete, we just basically are telling the software to only show this wall. Let's get everything back. Click on this temporary icon again, reset temporary. Let's do this one more time, and let's say we want to just see all the walls of that type, and we'll go to isolate category, and now it's going to show us the walls, all the walls in this level 2 section. Let me show you, this is probably the most handy, but if we want to make a more permanent view, let's reset this for now. If we want to make a more permanent view and not have to worry about going back and forth of isolating and hiding, we could turn certain layers on and off in a more permanent fashion. And before we do that, I want to show you that we're going to do that. We're going to turn elements on and off, but we don't want to affect this level 2. We want to keep it intact. So over here in the project browser, right click on the level 2, and we're going to just duplicate this view. Okay, and let's click duplicate the top one, which is just going to duplicate the objects without annotation or detailing information. So let's do that. Makes a copy of this view. Notice that some of the annotation and detailing didn't show up. That's because when we duplicated it, we selected just duplicate only without the detailing. So again, this is just another snapshot. We're not recreating elements. Zoom in and out here. This copy of level 2, let's just go in here, right click on that and do a rename, and let's just call this level 2 walls only. Okay, says what it is that we're going to do. We just want to show the walls, get rid of all this other stuff. So to make a more permanent view of this, we're going to, again, up in a couple different ways we could find this. Up in View, Visibility and Graphics, click on that. It opens a window that allows us to control what is on and off. Another way to get to that is in the Properties window. We also see this Visibility and Graphics override. We can click the Edit button here and also see the same window show up. So, various ways to get to things. In each of these tabs, we see visibility for different things, and what we want to do is just to have the walls show up. So probably the biggest, easiest thing to do is to select all of these, turn everything off, and then select none, and then turn the walls on. And annotation, let's do the same thing there. Select all, turn everything off, select none, and I don't think there's, yeah, we can leave all this off for here. Don't need to worry about these other two or other tabs for now. So the main two is just annotation, turn everything off, and in the models, only have the walls selected. Let's just hit apply before we get out of this and see what happens. And looks good, so we just have walls showing up and select OK. So now what we've did here is just basically made another snapshot window of level 2 showing just the walls, and that's all this view shows. Okay, now what we're going to do is play a little bit more with the properties and type properties. And what we're going to do is change this front wall here, the most southerly wall, and change the properties of that. So first let's close out of this level 2 and have only the level 2 in a 3D view, and we'll retile this and zoom in. So we can see what's going on over here in the right 3D window. It's pretty handy to have two views up simultaneously. We'll do that frequently. So we're going to highlight this wall, this exterior wall, and notice when you do that, so for now make sure it's not highlighted. Click escape a couple times to make sure nothing is active, and just keep an eye on this ribbon up above, and notice it changes when I select the wall. It opens up a tab automatically called Modify Walls. So basically what Revit's recognizing is that you've selected an object, and it assumes that you want to make changes to that object. And so this will always happen when you select something. The ribbon will change and open this tab, this Modify tab, that lets you do various modifications. Another thing that happened when we selected the wall was the Properties window gave us information about this wall. Okay, so I'm going to deselect it one more time. Notice that the Properties window is showing us information about the window, and when I select an object, in this case the wall, it changes in the Properties window to show me information about the object. Okay, this wall is, as we see up in the properties, basic wall, SIP, structural insulated panel with concrete clad. Let's change this wall to a different type. So we'll select the drop down arrow here, and let's find this one here, scroll up, exterior. Let's change this wall to a brick on metal stud. So select that, and usually when you change something, you have to either click the apply button or else move your cursor back over to the window. And when we do, we notice that it changes the wall. Let's take a look over here in the 3D. We're not quite, there we go. Now we're seeing a brick highlighted over it. We might need to come up and change our, make sure that your view here, we change it to realistic. Our display type and the view control down at the bottom. Before I believe it was shaded. So clicking it to realistic gives us a little more realistic view of what's happening. And the detail level, leave it for medium for now, is fine. Okay, so notice that that wall changed to a brick wall now, and we also changed the width of the wall just because of this family and how it's set up. Let's go ahead and change the thickness of the wall, and we'll show you how to further edit objects using the properties and the type properties window. So selecting this wall, up here in the properties window, you're going to select edit type. And what we want to do is make this wall thicker by changing the stud thickness. To do that, we have to, under the type parameters, structure, row, notice there's this edit button. So we want to edit this structure and drill down into the individual components of the wall itself. So we'll click on that, and it opens up another window called Edit Assembly. And notice that our wall assembly is set up into various sections or layers of our structure, which are our metal stud, core boundary, and then we have a plywood sheathing, a membrane layer, thermal layer, and our finish layer brick. And on the inside we have a vapor barrier and gypsum wallboard. So we'll get more into playing with how to set assemblies up. For now, I just want to show you the process we go through and how we can use properties. So on the structure for this metal stud, notice the thickness. Again, this is in millimeters, 152. Let's change this to 300. So highlight the thickness, change it to 300. Select OK. And let's keep an eye on this. I'm going to minimize this window a little bit so we can see this happen real time. So here's our original wall, and now that we've changed the thickness to 300, once we click the apply button, we should see the wall thickness update and change. Trying to get a view here so we can see it in both views. So we'll hit apply, and the wall changes thickness. Click OK. Okay, what we did was change the thickness for all these, any walls that have this brick on metal stud, not just this wall. So in other words, if another wall had that type of property, it would also change the thickness of it as well. So because of that, what we want to typically do is when we edit a type, go back into this one more time. Before we make changes like we just did, typically you want to duplicate using this duplicate and rename it. That way we keep the original and realize that we're making changes and we can name it, so it'll be self-explanatory what the changes are. Okay. So in this case, let's go back into edit and change this back to the 152. So we keep our original. And let's duplicate this. Or let's apply it first. Notice our wall changes. And let's duplicate this and rename it .300 thickness for now. And go back into edit. Now what we're doing is changing the properties of this one that we just duplicated and leaving the original as it is. Change this to 300. Okay. And okay. Okay. So we could go back and forth with this wall type by scrolling over to our properties and expanding the arrow. Notice here's our original brick and metal stud with the 152 millimeter thickness. If we select on that, our wall should change back to that thickness. As it just did, and bring it back to 300. So getting a little familiar now with the different windows, the interface, project browser, the properties window, and editing families and information about objects. So a lot here, but very powerful. And we're just starting this process, so it might be a little overwhelming at this point, but just stick with it and it'll all come together. We'll be using all of these things we're talking about today as we move along through other labs to get you more familiar with Revit and how it works. Okay. Up to this point, we have covered from Lab 1 on the handout up to page 3. And you should pause at this point and on your own complete the additional practice section on page 3 of the handout and get a little more practice with the interface, navigation, the project browser, the properties window, and how to change things. So we're going to end this first part of the video for Lab 1 at this point and let you take time to get more practice. And then when you're completed with that, come back to the second part, part 2 of Lab 1, and we'll continue crop regions and match lines and view templates.